have been anxiously awaiting this meeting, so I thank you so much for being here today. If you can mute, that will be a help while we are able to venture through our agenda today. And I'm going to turn it over to President McGuire.
Thank you very much, Marva. I want to introduce to all, as you may know, our new state superintendent, Steve Jackson. He comes to us with a variety of experience, professionalism, enthusiasm, resourcefulness. He's a self-starter, but most of all, he knows this. He's a risk taker. And so I am excited about having him join this group. I can say this for President, for our president of the NAACP. I was thinking about, we have an opportunity to advance a best practice to close the achievement gap for Black students. You know, when the founding of the NAACP was based on the National Organization for the Advancement of Colored People. And if you look at the history, it was really to bring about equality for all. You know, the American dream was for everyone. Opportunities existed for everyone. It's just how we access them. And so one of the roles, the primary underpinnings of the organization was the advancement for people of color. And so President Roberts, we are excited to have joined with us today, the new State Superintendent of Public Instruction. Steve, you want to say a few comments, and then Mr. Roberts, you can respond.
You think after 2 years I could unmute myself when I'm supposed to. I do want to take this opportunity to thank Charlotte for the kind words and the opportunity to serve. I'm humbled and excited about the prospect ahead. This particular work group is really important to me. I will tell you that going back to 2001, when No Child Left Behind first got passed and we started disaggregating data at the state level, we saw gaps in achievement. So that's 21 years ago. And we're still seeing gaps in achievement. And that's just so unacceptable on so many levels. And so I am really thrilled about being able to work with this group. Stephanie has filled me in, and I have to say a quick word about Stephanie. She's been phenomenal in her role as Interim-State Superintendent, and I'm looking forward to making a recommendation at our June board meeting, which our illustrious president of the board is going to take a well-deserved vacation, but I'm still going to recommend that Stephanie become the deputy superintendent. I just think she's done a phenomenal job, and I'm really thrilled to have her as a partner. And however you want to refer to it, Charlotte, as dynamic duo or whatever, I think the eligibility is going to have Stephen in their name. You're going to have S-T-E-P-H somewhere in your first name. I think that's how you get there. And one last thing I'll say, I got to jump off, and I really apologize for that. The timing of this couldn't be worse for me. But the board asked me during the course of the interviews, we had some written questions that we had to respond to in the interview process. And one of those written questions were, what are you most proud of as a superintendent? And I was superintendent of the Reynoldsburg City Schools at the time. The number of low-income and Black and brown children were increasing in our district to the point that my last 2 or 3 years there, we were actually a majority district. And at the same time, we got A's and B's on the report card, and we were the second lowest per pupil expenditure district in Franklin County. So it can be done. And what I said I was most proud of, I highlighted 2 things. First was I was really proud of opening up our district to all kids. We went inter-district open enrollment, so any kid in Ohio could come to Reynoldsburg City School. I just thought that was really important for parents to have quality choices. The second thing I was most proud of is narrowing the achievement gap between our minority students and our majority students while in Reynoldsburg. And I was very proud of that. We had a lot of work to do. We weren't where we needed to be, but we had made some progress. And so I know that this work in part is about doing these kinds of things. And so I'm excited to learn from this group and looking forward to partnering with you.
You have to stay on long enough to hear Mr. Roberts. And is Mr. Jimma on?
I have not seen President Charlotte as yet, but I'm sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, go on, President Roberts.
Well, thank you, and Superintendent, welcome aboard. I don't know my background. I was a legislator for 20 years, and I represented in the Dayton area in the House and the Senate. And all during that time, I was on the Education Committee. I was on the Finance Committee and the Subcommittee on College, Universities, and Education. But in all that time, I never saw the General Assembly take on this task, looking at education from a Black perspective. We looked at it from all children, looked at it as efficient, but this is the first time I think in the history of the state, but specifically from my term in General Assembly, we've looked at it from this perspective. And President Shirley, you're absolutely correct. The NAACP, the action word is on advancement. That's why Brown versus the Board of Education is so critical to this conversation and to everything we do, because it is about the advancement of colored people, advancement in education, employment, all the areas we can think of. So that's why the work of this group is so critically important. That's why we're looking at finalizing the report. As I've often said, okay, it's supposed to be done. Okay, now it's going to be done before 4th of July. But now it's time for us to take it off the shelf and put it into action. So I'm looking forward to the advancement part of what this report. And Superintendent, I'd like you and I to sit down sometime and just get to know each other sometime soon. And I've asked Mrs. Jones to arrange that, and hopefully that can happen here soon.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it sooner than later.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you,
Appreciate
President.
it. Thank you. Again, I apologize for having to leave, but look forward to additional conversations.
Well, you're back in the hands of our leader, Ms. Jones.
Thank you so much, President McGuire. And we are very grateful that Superintendent Daphne was able to join us, even for a few minutes. We said how important it was to at least be able to say hello. So, Dr. Steph, I'm sorry, since SPECH has been there, Dr. Siddens, would you like to say anything else before we move forward?
Just good afternoon, and thanks for being here for today's meeting. We look forward to discussing more on school improvement. So, Marva, I'll turn it back to you.
Right, thank you. And if you got on just a few minutes late, I have asked for you to please be sure to mute yourself so that any background noise will not interrupt our great presenters today. If I can have the next slide. So as you all will know, hopefully, you were participating in the May 12th meeting where we had Shelby and Chris who did a review of the report card reform. And we dived in pretty deeply and had lots of details, and this discussion was not able to be had as much as we wanted because there was so much information to share. So today, we are going to do a review of Ohio's school improvement system. And we want to let you know ahead of time, we've got lots of good information here as well today, and hoping to have a little bit of time at the end to be able to ask questions, unless Cindy or Johanna instruct you. Otherwise, we'll probably wait until the end because the very question you probably want to ask might be on the next slide or two. So jot your questions down and know that we are hoping that we'll have a little bit of time at the end. Additionally, I just teased you a little bit last meeting about our proposed plan to pilot the self-assessment tool, and we want to give you a bit more information. So as you listen today, we will be asking you at an upcoming meeting, where do you think this self-assessment tool can be implemented into some of our already existing processes? So think about that. Oh, this is a good area where we may be able to make sure that we utilize it so we can set a firm foundation. Next slide. Cindy and Johanna have been hearing about this information, I'm going to say, well before Stephanie new to school improvement. Johanna looked at the list from the task force that I know a lot of those folks. Cynthia returned home here, I think, about 3 years ago and did some work on this in North Carolina State Department. So these two are entrenched and really are the leaders within the department on district school improvement support and processes. So Johanna Ward is the director in the Office for Exceptional Children, and Cynthia Dooley is the director in the Office for Improvement and Innovation. Next slide, please. I'm going to turn it over to them, and I'm going to mute myself, but know I'm here listening carefully, and I may have some questions as well, I think. Thank you, Cynthia and Johanna.
Thanks, Marva. I'm just gonna take us back one slide. I clicked that by mistake. First, I just want to say thank you all for allowing me to be here with you today. I'm excited to share with you sort of the ongoing piece. You've heard from Shelby Robertson last month around the report card system. Once we have the report card system, the accountability system in place, then what happens in the Office for Improvement and Innovation is we do identification based on the report card outcome. And so I just want to talk to you about what that identification looks like at the federal and state level, what's required, and then how we support districts that find themselves in this lower 5% and identified for targeted support. So really there are, I'm just going to dive in, and please write your questions down. I'm happy to answer them. There are 3 levels of identification. Comprehensive support is the main level of identification. That's what we've called priority schools in the past. And then we have targeted. So it's full comprehensive and support and improvement, and then targeted. And then targeted really breaks up into 2 different types of identification. One is just like we need some additional targeted support. So comprehensive, this is what it means to be identified for comprehensive support. It's a federal ESSA identification. We in Ohio, following those federal guidelines, identify the lowest performing 5% of all Title I schools and all high schools that are failing to graduate at least 1/3 or more of their students. And then the third part is if they've been identified for this additional targeted support for several years and haven't shown improvement, then they receive comprehensive. So that's the first level of identification. Here are the other 2 that I talked about, targeted support and additional targeted support. And this, I think you might be really interested in, because this is really where, and Superintendent Dackman was talking about this as well, this is where we are looking at subgroup performance. So targeted support, schools are identified anytime there is 1 or more consistently underperforming subgroup of students. So when Superintendent Dackman was talking about the gap, this is how we know this and how schools are identified. And then additional targeted support just means we need an additional layer of support, because not only is the subgroup not performing, the subgroup is performing as poorly as the lowest performing 5% of schools that were already identified. So those are really the 3 levels of federal identification that comes out of our accountability system that you heard about last month, Shelby. Keep it. The next area, and Ohio is unique in this, is Ohio has a state law for identification as well. And the state identification is watch schools, which just really means what it says. We need to watch these schools because they're struggling to meet the needs of their subgroup. And I don't know, Johanna, if you want to say any more about that, some of this work, also specifically Johanna's office support.
Yeah, thank you, Cindy. So these could be either Title I or non-Title I schools that receive state funding to provide services for any of the 4 specific subgroups of students with disabilities, English learners, gifted, and or economically disadvantaged. So if any one or more than one of those subgroups is performing poorly or not showing satisfactory progress, then this school will be identified as a watch school. And that means that as Cindy said, they're put on a list to be watched, but we don't just actually sit back and watch them. They are required to put together a plan on how they are going to impact and change the progress and the trajectory of that subgroup. And so between our two offices together, we have teams that work with those tools to help them develop a plan, look at their data, and figure out kind of what are the best practices they need to put in place to move forward.
That's great. That was a nice segue, because the next thing that we want to share with you is around the requirements. So once a school is identified as underperforming, the requirement, the federal requirement, says that they need to develop what the U.S. Department of Ed calls a comprehensive support and improvement plan. We call that a needs assessment and a one plan or improvement plan. But here's the key that I think we'll be interested in. It is required by federal law that these plans be developed in partnership with stakeholders. And we look for that when we're reviewing. So the next thing where it says be approved by the district and SEA, we are the state education agency, so that's ODE. So they have to involve stakeholders, and we look specifically for that. So when they're doing their needs assessment, they have to identify which partners were involved in supporting this planning. And we're looking for community-based partnerships and community stakeholders. And then, you know, if that's not included, and they don't have stakeholders involved in identifying the root cause analysis, then my office will work with the district and the state support team to ensure that that becomes part of their work. And then, so we talked about identification, we talked about requirements, the federal requirements. I'm moving on now to supports that we provide. So there's funding for improvement. So once schools are identified, they are able to receive funding, and they receive funding based on their identification status. So we have, in my office, we have school improvement grants. We also have expanding opportunity grants. We have 21st century and also summer learning and after school grants. And so these grants are going to school improvement for those identified districts and schools, and also even the summer learning grants. We gave priority to those community organizations that were partnering with those schools that were identified. And Johanna can talk more about IDEA support.
Thank you, Cindy. So I'm going to follow along similarly to what Cindy just did with ESSA and talk about IDEA, or Individuals with Disabilities Education. So special education, IDEA requires the state to produce district profiles, and that is our public reporting. And so I'll talk more about that in the next slide.
Yeah. And then just to finish up, so really these are the two ways that we provide improvement support. We do it through funding from the Office for Improvement Innovation and also for Exceptional Children. We provide funding for improvement. And then also we're required by federal law to provide technical assistance. So that technical assistance looks like if there's a significant number of percentage of schools identified in a district, then we provide technical assistance to them. And we do that mainly through the state support team, but we also do a lot of funding support and direct assistance out of our offices. And I'll talk later about the continuum of support and what that looks like.
Thanks, Cindy.
Yep.
So to talk a little bit more about the purpose and use of special education as it relates to like an accountability system, special education, or IDEA, does require that the state identify districts based on specific data points. And then from those data points, we create district profiles. And all these are just like different words, but it's basically a special education report card. So it's our public reporting of what's happening in special education for that school district. And these are produced annually for schools. And there are 17 different indicators with different data calculations, which we won't go into. If a district does not meet any of the compliance indicators, and I'll show you those in a minute, then there are some required accountability pieces. And I'm telling you all this to give you a big idea of the big structure of IDEA, but then we're going to get down to a smaller policy piece, and then we'll look at how this policy can impact change. We go to the next slide. So IDEA requires states to monitor districts and enforce compliance with IDEA. It also requires states to collect data and measure districts' performance with the implementation of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. We also report annually. That's the district profile or special ed report card I was explaining. And then from that, we also identify districts. So just as Cindy was talking about identifying mechanism for ESSA, now we can identify districts and what supports they need. We do the same thing with IDEA. So based on the data that they submit, there's some calculations and we do some determinations and we make some identifications of those districts that need intervention, need assistance, need support. And then we target particular support to them and work with them. A large focus of this time and effort is spent on disproportionality or the disproportionality indicators. And those are the ones I want to hone in on here in a few minutes and talk a little bit more about. The next slide here just gives you a big picture idea of what happens in our office. So our Office for Exceptional Children is required to ensure, as I said, the supports and monitoring are happening related to IDEA. And these are, I'm not going to read all of these. These are all the pieces of our work that we do to support districts out there with the implementation of the federal law. But in particular there, you'll see, we're going to talk here about our state performance plan. So that's okay, go on the next slide. So just as ESSA requires a state plan, IDEA requires the state to have a plan. And that's called our state performance plan. And then we annually have to report our performance on that to the federal government. And that's based on the same 17 indicators of data that we measure and report on for districts. So it's the same. What happens for districts happens to us as a state. Then the state performance plan is our blueprint for our system change. So we really take time to look at the data pieces, look at those gaps or those failing systems, and work together to put a plan and put supports in place for districts that are in the system that are failing and for our goals as a state agency for what we can do at the state level. This is a 5-year plan, and our most recent one was just recently approved, and it runs through 2025-26 school year, and we are focusing on graduation. And this is a graduation point for students with disabilities. And you'll see here, this is a list of all our indicators. So I'm talking to you about those indicators. These are akin to like our report card measures, basically. And they're not in order. You'll notice that they're not in order here. We have them grouped in order that makes sense to the questions to the left. So those questions are how we want districts to think about the data, look at the data, and ask those questions to determine their plans for what's happening, what they're going to do to improve. So we want them to use the data in Indicator 6 and Indicator 7 and Indicator 12, for an example, at the top of the list, to drive their discussion and their plan development to their question to the left. Are young children with disabilities entering kindergarten ready to learn? So it proceeds through there. The indicators that are in red, those are the compliance indicators. So those are the ones that either have to fully meet 100% or not meet. Some of them are down to like 0. So suspensions and expulsions, we don't want them to be at 100% of suspensions and expulsions. We want those to be down to 0. So if they don't meet those, then they're put on a corrective action and they are required to put a plan in place and have support involved from our office and from our state support team. In particular, you'll take note, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into the bottom portion there in purple. Are children receiving equitable services and support? So this is disproportionality, and this is the special education, and we'll just get into that in a minute. So if we go to the next slide, we're going to talk about what is significant disproportionality. So while we have to run data on disproportionality in special education, we are required to identify when a district has significant disproportionality. And so that's the definition is when a child from any racial or ethnic group are identified for special education or placed in a more restrictive setting or disciplined at a markedly higher rate than their peers. So in the context of IDEA, disproportionality is an overrepresentation. And it becomes significant when the overrepresentation exceeds a threshold that was set by the state with stakeholder involvement. We run the data on this analysis annually and identify districts that have significant disproportionality. This is another way to look at the categories of analysis for disproportionality. As I said, identification, placement, and discipline are the categories that we look at. And in specific, you can see identification of students with disabilities. These are the disability types that we're looking at. And when we talk about placement, we're talking about are students placed in a regular classroom for less than 40% of their day, or inside a separate school or facility, because we're looking to find those students that are separated or segregated from their general education children. We're also looking at discipline. Are they significantly disciplined more or expelled more than their other peers? So we're looking at those differences and making some analysis and then identifying districts with that data. The next slide, please. So our last calculation of significant dispro, this is our data, we call it dispro for short. Disproportionality. 85% of the categories there flagged were in the area of special education identification. And that number 114 there represents the number of districts that are identified to have significant disproportionality for the identification of students with disabilities, particularly of Black students. The number of placements are 6%, or 8 districts had students that were placed in a more restrictive setting, and then 12 or 9% had discipline issues. Now, the discipline is really low. Typically, in years past, we've seen the discipline percentage be a higher percentage. We believe that due to the pandemic and COVID issues that we've seen a decline in discipline during that time period. But we're, anxiously awaiting to see what our next data report says for next year's. Next slide. So states have been required to identify and address significant disproportionality since 2004, the reauthorization of IDEA. So the longitudinal national data continues to show disparities by race. Nationally, Black students make up 13.8% of the population ages 6 to 21, yet they account for 17.9% of the students with disabilities. The disproportionate representation there is even higher in Ohio, where Black students make up 14.6% of the population ages 6 to 21, and yet they account for 20.3% of students with disabilities. This is a high percentage. Next slide. When we look at discipline, looking at disciplinary removals, we look at discipline per 100 students, which provides us a way to compare discipline events consistently across different racial groups. So disciplinary removals cover all of the disciplinary types listed in that bottom right corner of the slide, including in-school suspensions, out-of-school suspensions, and expulsions. So you can see here, our Black students far exceed all other racial groups with 65 removals per 100 students. The next closest racial group is multiracial students, and they experience 40 removals per 100. And then the count decreased from there. The next slide is a slide you've seen. It was in one of your earlier presentations when this group first started meeting, because I went back and looked at all your presentations, so I saw it was in there. Ohio mirrors the national data in terms of racial disparities for Black students. So in Ohio, education in Ohio, educators are 2 times as likely to identify Black students with intellectual disabilities, place Black students in more restrictive settings, and remove Black students for discipline. And 3 times as likely to identify Black students with an emotional disturbance or expel Black students. Black students make up 15% of enrollment, but 44% of out-of-school suspension. So how is this addressed? Districts are notified of the significant disproportionality through their special education profiles. And according to IDE regulations and what we follow, if a district meets the definition of significant dispro, they are required to do the following 3 things here. Review their policies and procedures and practices in the identification, placement of students, and disciplining of students. So we want them to take time to look at their policies, procedures, and practices and see if what they have written down, what should be the right thing to do, they're following. We also ask them to identify the factors that may be contributing to the significant disproportionality. And then we provide services, they must provide services. We provide services to support them, but they have to provide services to address that contributing factor. They're required to redirect 15% of their federal special education funds to address the significant disproportionality issue when it's identified. On the next slide. So there's technical assistance provided to the district with relation to their indicator or data review. So there are supports in place to help them do a deep dive and a root cause analysis to determine what is happening with their policies and practices, or what is not happening with their policies and practices that should be. Then they develop a focused plan. There's professional learning and support provided where needed, targeted to the right area. And there's implementation and consistent coaching and monitoring and feedback for these districts. We have a heavy hand involved. We work collaboratively with Cindy's office with the school improvement work. A lot of this is done together because it's important that we address the system structures and we support the continuous improvement processes in place to help them make the change effort, not just a Band-Aid. Next slide. So what we have in place in Ohio, which is really special that I don't think actually any other state has in place. Other states have education service centers, but I've talked to many states across our country and most of them do not have a legislative call to action. Our legislators put in place their Ohio Revised Code to establish our educational regional service system, what we call our state support teams. And this was put into place back in 2008-9, and it requires the school improvement efforts and the special education efforts to come together in this regional structure to provide dedicated coaching and support that's consistent across the state, that can get involved, that can get in at the building and at the district level and help move these particular pieces that we have in all these policies and law and help move them through those districts. Cindy, would you like to add here?
I would. So one of the things I think that is most impressive when you think about, are we getting the people to support our districts and schools? 90% of the work of the SSTs is focused on providing comprehensive support. That means they're in the district working and coaching. The other thing that they do that I think is is really helpful is Johanna talked about it, I've talked about it, they support root cause analysis and the selection of evidence-based strategies. And just for an understanding of the types of districts that they're working with, we have a range or continuum of support from independent to districts under academic distress. So it really goes from what you're seeing on the screen, the highest level of support, to really more independent or more what we would call universal supports, where they might be providing some regional training. And just to reiterate that what comprehensive support looks like, once a school is identified by the Ohio Department of Education, districts and schools receive that comprehensive support from state support teams, which involves high quality professional development and coaching and technical assistance. And I just want to give you a quick example here. I was just meeting with a SST yesterday, and part of that comprehensive support that they were providing for an intensive district was working with their district leadership team to help them to walk through a team problem-solving process, which we call the Ohio Improvement Process. So they were really looking for shared leadership. They were looking for coaching around, do we have all the right voices at the table? And have we selected evidence-based practices, and are they working? And so they step into the district level team and provide that kind of coaching and support. In case you haven't seen it, this is what it looks like, our improvement system, the Ohio Improvement Process. And really it's a 5-step problem-solving process that happens with teams. So it's shared leadership, shared decision-making at the district level, at the building level, and at the classroom level with teachers on teacher-based teams. But we want them to be able to clearly identify the needs. So look at the right data. We want them to be able to select strategies that work. So use what works, use your data, step 1. Step 2, use what works. Step 3, lay it out in a plan. They're required by us to have an improvement plan. And then try it out, implement it, monitor it, and then decide, did it work? What do we need to change? So it's a continuing process that all supports implementation, if you look at the center of that circle. So all of these steps support the implementation of evidence-based strategies and serve as our problem-solving model. So just to give you another look at it, this is our pathway of impact for regional support. So the bottom there, you see the regional teams, and this means SST members, it also means ESC members. They impact the district team. Like the example that I gave you, they're in that district, they're working with the team, they're coaching along. The district team then supports or impacts the building team, which impacts teachers' teams, which impacts our students.
And I'd like to add, like, the effort here is really to support that system structure so that there's some sustainability, right? So it's not just strangers coming in with some expert advice, telling you how to fix something, giving you some tools, and then walking away. This system is set up to support the district to have success in building a system structure so that whatever evidence-based strategies they bring into the system, they have a way to process, evaluate, and move those through so that they're sustainable.
Yeah. And as an example of that, we work with the SST consultants to ensure that they have a clear understanding of a problem-solving model and how to coach around that. They work with the district team and ensure that the district level team knows how to provide support and engage in problem-solving with the building level team. Then the building teams do that for teacher teams, so that there is connectivity across the entire system, and that when we talk about problem-solving, we all know the steps to that. We can select the right data and make good database decisions so that it impacts the achievement of students. I also just wanted to put this in front of you today, that ESSA requires a comprehensive needs assessment and an improvement plan. And in Ohio, I think we have been really strategic about what that looks like and provided support for not just identified districts, but for all districts to be able to identify their needs, engage in root cause, and develop a one plan. And that all happens through our EdStep system. The other thing that we're working on and we're revamping is the improvement review. So my office, in relation to the intensive support office, is working with an outside contractor who will be awarded soon to develop an improvement review so that we are on site gathering data, analyzing what we find, and providing support for our comprehensive districts that are identified as intensive.
And can I add real quick, Cindy, that the needs assessment, one needs assessment and one plan are a collaborative design and supported across the agency. So this is not just something that's separately coming out of the improvement office while they lead and direct and coordinate. It is intentional to be cross-cutting across all the different offices that have requirements in their laws around needs assessment and planning. So the district has one place to go access and do all of that work. It is comprehensive.
Yeah, and the best system I've seen. You know, I feel proud to be a part of it because it has been across the entire department where people are working together to look at the plans instead of just one office reviewing all the plans with the rubric. Everyone is looking at the specific aspects of the plan that relates to their expertise.
Another thing that we have that sits in our office, the Office for Exceptional Children, is an urban team. And this urban team is focused on these prioritized districts that you see here. That's Akron. I'll read them because I know some people are on the phone, so I'm sorry for saying see here. Akron, Canton, Cincinnati, Cleveland, Columbus, Dayton, East Cleveland, Lima, Toledo, Youngstown, and Zanesville. So these are prioritized districts, and we have dedicated support person for each of those districts. And that person serves as a single point of contact to really focus in on special education and coherence and coordination of general education first, because we know our students with disabilities are students first. So what's happening in the general education realm, and then specifically what's happening to provide special education services and support in these districts for those students. Key areas of support for these 11 districts are cross-cutting across the agency, similar to what one plan and one needs assessment is, and it hones in sharply on big areas such as literacy, data analysis to look at MTSS, so our buildings and teachers really understanding the formative assessment information of where a student is in their learning and what kind of instructional strategies they need to put in place to elevate and move that student forward so they can progress. Post-secondary experiences and graduation, of course, as I mentioned, is a big area in our office of focus. Thank you, Cindy. And then the last slide are links for you all, and it has a link to the disproportionality in special education 2-page document that gives you a little more detail and information about disproportionality in special education. There's also a link for our FAQ on disproportionality, a technical document that really gets into the calculations. If you like calculations, you can study that document. And then there is a fiscal guidance document, and that helps districts understand what they can do with when they're required to redirect 15% of their funds, what they're allowed to do and what they're restricted and required to do. And then an overview document, which gives you requirements and supports and exemplars, because we really want districts who are struggling to understand what are some exemplars out in the field. And then my contact information if you have any additional questions.
And then, Johanna, thank you so very much. Really appreciate that information. Now, I told folks to not jump in and interrupt, so I'm thinking, are there some questions on anything that they discussed? You want us to go back to a slide? Let us know now. This is the time.
Dr. Jones, I have two questions.
Yeah.
Tom Roberts. One is, you talked about community-based stakeholders and you take the plan too. Can you help me identify who some of the community-based stakeholders are? Are there parent groups or whatever in the district?
I was gonna call you Stephanie. Cindy, if you want to start, then I'll chime in about specifics for IDEA.
Of course. So there, in the law, it doesn't specifically state who these stakeholders are, but the requirement is that they engage with community stakeholders. And so we look for that, and they have to state them in their plan. So we look for that in their plan.
Okay.
And then for IDEA, we can also get you some more information. I'm sorry, let me back up for a second. For stakeholder engagement with ESSA, one of the requirements was the district to involve stakeholders as they set their plans in motion. Something that Ohio did that a lot of other states borrowed and took from Ohio was the Ohio Local Stakeholder Engagement Toolkit. And Marcia from Cleveland area was also helpful in this, and I can't remember what organization I thought she was. She's on this. Yeah, yes, and she's on this committee. I don't know if she's on today. Yeah. But she was instrumental in helping us put this stakeholder engagement toolkit together. So I just, wanted to point that out, and we can put that link in the chat for you so you can have that. Yeah, Marcia Huckabee. But in regards to special education, we also have similar requirements, and we have in the federal law for IDEA, it does require that the state hold a state advisory panel for exceptional children, which is made up of 51% parents of students with disabilities. So that's our parent group.
I'll follow back to Marcia. She and I, we were working together on this and some other things. And here's the other question, and it really, yes.
I wanted to follow just a minute, just on that same topic. There are a couple of questions in the chat.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No, just because it aligns with your first question. And I wonder, Senator Johanna, can you say how schools, or districts importantly, reach out to get community-based input? I just wonder if you could speak to that. And then it says, one of the questions, which community-based groups are engaged? May we have a list? And they're thinking this is one list, but if you can talk about how schools reach out to districts, that might help.
Yeah, so thank you, Johanna, for putting that stakeholder engagement toolkit in the chat. So it really is up to the district. It's local control. They decide who they're partnering with. What we do is we monitor, did they have voices at the table? Specifically when they were looking at their data and engaging in root cause analysis. So that's really what we look for. And they have to identify them in the 1 week assessment, which filters into their one plan. So I see that Tiffany's question, the plan, are you stating the application process? And so that is currently our CCIP, or EdStep plan, which is publicly available on our website. You can search any district and take a look at their plan.
And for Tiffany's question, there's two applications in that system. One is the funding application. So they're applying for the funding to go along with the other, which is their plan for improvement.
Excellent. We'll go on, Mr. Roberts, with the second question before we go back to the chat question. You're on mute right now.
Okay, the second one is a little more challenging. You may think I'm throwing you a curveball, but I really need to understand this. But we know that the disability rights group sued, in federal court, and the 11 school districts that you pointed out, the urban districts were the 11 school districts that were told to improve their system with service to disability. What you're showing us, how is that going to change under what the federal law told the school districts to do? They probably said, they said the school district, 11 school districts, exactly 11, are to improve their services to students with disabilities and put together a plan, probably by this year, I think it's supposed to go in place. How are these 11 school districts, how have their plans changed the services that the court said they were not offering?
Thank you. That's a good question. The urban team that I talked about here is one dedicated support person per district. And that person is basically embedded really with that district. So they're there as chief to support their district superintendent and to support their system structures with that data analysis, and then identifying what are the strategies and practices they need to change and put in place to support their students with disabilities. And there were identified areas in the settlement agreement that we at the state have to target support around and build capacity of for those districts. And I mentioned a few of them, and I didn't want to mention all of them. There's like 9. But the big ones are like literacy, PBIS, the culture and climate, MTSS, multi-tiered systems of support, and post-secondary experiences for students with disabilities, and graduation. Like those are the big, heavy ones. And we have put together dedicated professional learning experience that we are hand walking those districts and their teams through. And it's more of a partnership process, because we know that, kind of being too heavy-handed and saying you have to do this and throw it to them and then walk away doesn't work. So we are walking alongside them and supporting them with the implementation of this and helping them build those system structures. And you all know how that takes time, but we are seeing change in the system structure development and the focus on those key practices that we want to see changing in the adults, right? So we want to see the teachers and the leaders make some practice changes that provide better support structures for their students with disabilities in those areas. Does that help answer your question a little bit?
Yeah, it gets me in the ballpark. All right, thanks. Okay,
Well, and
go ahead.
yeah, and if it helps, the state support team is also embedded in these districts and are developing ways to monitor the progress. So we'll have a fuller answer for you, I think, as they've had time to engage in monitoring. So when you ask what difference has it made, I think we'll know more as we gather information this year and are monitoring the process.
Thank you. Thanks, Dr.
Great question. Thank you, Mr. Robert. We'll go to the chat for 2 other questions there are before we ask them outright. So Tiffany is going right to the heart of the matter about how would the simplest be utilized to address these districts. And I'm not going to ask Johanna and Cindy to answer, but that is something that we are asking you, as I said at the beginning. Where do you think some of the natural entry points are versus just, hey, here's another thing you need to do in the course of your list of things throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the year, a semester. Here's something else we want you to do, and we're going to add it on. And I was taking notes when they talked about that improvement process and taking notes about the various plans that are already within the district. And so I want to, I'm not going to turn it on you right now, but think about the template. Many of you are heavily involved in the creation and the editing of this, but think about that, because that's something that we want to not just say, hey, ODE has decided this is where we'll use the template, because all of ODE was not heavily involved in this, but the task force members, the process oversight members were. So we want to get your your ideas and have conversation about this before we just say, here's what we think it should be. And that conversation will not only be with ODE, some of the members you say last week present and this week, but those state support team members who are entrenched in the districts already. They're not new folks coming in, hey, listen to this. But people who are already there helping move the processes along with those systems. So I'm going to hold on that one, Tiffany. Cindy, in your hand, do you have anything that you'd like to add before I go to the next question?
I don't. Thanks, Marva.
Okay.
Thank you.
Tiffany, fair enough to wait?
I certainly can, and when we circle back, I definitely would want to, talk a little bit further about pilot versus full integration, so that we can have a better understanding about how, in fact, this will really look at impacting our students. I've heard a lot of really good data-driven, evidence-based components. I'm thinking, though, about the results, looking at the historical components of what's been done and looking at how these models, if they are in fact very different, if they're implementing different strategies, different things, if they're culturally competent and using culturally competent individuals as a portion of engagement and moving forward, how that then impacts both the engagement with the parents, the engagement with the students, the engagement with the administrators, so that we're able to reach individuals in ways that are not only meaningful for them, but that really address the performance standards that we want to see with gap closures. And I hope I'm clear with what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I'm just reading from the front of that assessment, these practices are based upon what is known by schools and districts as high performance and have significantly closed the achievement gap. It's been assist educators. Individuals are briefed in assessing the state of commitment, supports, and practices that are positively impacting the academic performance of Black students. So you're right where we need to be, and I'm jotting down that about pilot versus full integration. We're not quite there yet for that conversation, but we will be in a few short minutes. Let's see if there are other questions. Nicole Spicer asked, is this information available? I'm guessing Nicole, are you referring to the PowerPoint that Cindy Johanna had walked through? I don't assume, because I don't know when that went up, what they were talking about at that time. Nicole Spicer? I'm going to say yes until we know for sure that that's what she was asking, but we are going to follow up with the slides just like even last month with the report card. We'll make sure that we put this up. Okay, any other questions? I see a question. President McGuire, see your hand up.
Thank you, ma'am. I want to thank our team for that presentation. It was very excellent. Given the purpose for this task force, best practice models, and we're talking about pilot versus full implementation, but, and correct me if I'm wrong, initially we were thinking about models that are working. So we were looking at replication, if you will, with tweaks to meet the unique needs and aspirations within the district. So my question is, do we have districts that fit the model that's aligned with this framework that we could use as an example to replicate with unique changes to the district to meet the expected outcome? I hope I'm saying that right. Does that make sense? You know, and the reason I'm asking this, and Johanna and President Roberts knows this, you know, concern in the early 90s was that Black children were disproportionately identified for disabilities because the professional staff didn't know how to deal with it. You know, whether it was behavior, whether it was co-occurring disorders. And the concern yet remains are Black students disproportionately identified for IDA or special needs because the leadership, if you will, does not know how to engage them in learning. Am I making sense to you all?
Yes, ma'am.
And Mr. Roberts, you can comment, but I
No,
don't
I
want to
think
go down
you're
this
right.
rabbit hole again.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, because I'm a big, tall, burly guy, Black, and the faculty member can't deal with me. They put me in special ed. I think Meryl was coming as well. So we still see it happening in our school district. That's why we were deeply interested in the disability rights lawsuit and how it's being handled.
Yeah.
So you're absolutely correct.
Let me add the disproportionality, and the significant disproportionality is exactly the policy that we can use to enact like some change in that area, right? So we've seen change. In my slide deck, you'll see, the links I have at the end. There's one that's called, hold on, I forgot what it's titled, overview. And that one has some, if you open that link and then scroll down to the bottom, there's some exemplars in there, some districts that have moved themselves out of those situations. Exactly what you're saying is true. They might have policies and procedures in place of the right way to go about using tools, evaluation tools, to evaluate if a student needs special education or not, but they might not be following those policies and procedures. And so that's what we help them go through. Here's your written policies and procedures. First, are they written correctly? Are they written correctly? And then second, are you implementing them correctly? So we provide some support in monitoring and looking at their implementation processes to find those places, exactly what you're saying, where they're not implementing what they have written. So then we go through that effort to provide them some coaching support and changing their practices so that they are following the policies and procedures.
So do you have a current, some districts that would fit the model that you're talking about, that are doing some great work? And I'm not trying to expedite Mr. Roberts. We want to give a model for the nation, of course, through the NAACP. So do we have some that are already identified that we can begin looking at that fits the framework for both ESSA or ESSA and IDEA?
Yeah, I mean, I have 4 districts already identified on this overview document, so you can, I mean, they're not identified. Their names aren't there, but I know who they are. Like, it just says District A, B, C, or D. But yes, this is what we have.
And the only reason I raised that is when we started this, Mr. McWilson made it clear that there are some districts doing some great things. And what is it? And how can we replicate what they are doing to make a difference for closing the achievement gap for Black students? What are those models?
Yeah, President McGuire, I hear you. Part of the thinking of the task force was to look at Ohio and what we're doing at Ohio. We can say Connecticut's doing this or Chicago's doing that. And people will say, well, that's Connecticut, that's Chicago. But if we say it's happening in Orange School District, okay, that's right next door. So part of what I hear Charlotte saying is, if we can find 3 or 4 examples of what's going on in this area in Ohio, then when we start to implement it, we can say, well, look at what this school district, Steubenville, look at that district. So that's where she's coming from. And Charlotte, I think your colleague is waiting patiently. I can see her ready to jump in. So I better let Meryl jump in before she takes both of us going. Go ahead, Commissioner.
Oh, Marva, you better leave me alone. I just wanted to mention that.
Sorry about that, Meryl. I didn't see your hand. I don't see everybody on my computer.
Oh, no problem. I just wanted to mention when Paulo was superintendent, he had a book club. We did a book club with a book called Districts That Succeed. And it talked about 5 or 6 districts, and one of them was in Ohio. So we never talked about that district, and I can't think of the name of it because I don't have the book in front of me. But
Steubenville.
go. There you go.
Okay, so we do have,
Look, no, Cindy's holding up the book as a prompt.
oh, I can't see on my computer, I can't see what's hold up stuff, but thank you. But yeah, so we do have examples, and I think that book itself was wonderful in talking about how districts that may be low income are succeeding. And so I just want to put that out there because it's a resource that we could also use or recommend to other districts.
Yeah, Meryl, Steubenville is on NAACP's radar. They presented several of our workshops, and we pointed to them early on in this conversation as a school district that we think the state needs to look at, and they're doing a fantastic job. So Jimma and Mrs. Moore reached out to them early, and I did at least 2 presentations where they were there. So we do recognize them as NAACP. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Ms. Moore, did you want to say something? Your hand was up for a moment and back down.
No, President Roberts covered it.
Okay, thank you. Are there any more questions? Cindy put the name of that book in the chat that Member Johnson was referring to. Can you put that last slide back up for me, please?
We have a question. I do have a question.
Okay, WilliAnn, Ms. Moore, go ahead.
My question is, our task force was formed for best practices, academic practices for Black students, and we're working on a template. We have districts that we know are low performing. We've already identified 11. So then my question is, we have 11 districts that we could start implementing these best academic practices to help bring these districts up to a C level. Mm-hmm. So and there are many schools in Ohio that have best academic practices, and we've identified those schools and those districts. So why are we looking for schools? I don't understand.
Okay, Ms. Moore, thank you so much for your comment and your question. I'd like to just share our thoughts moving forward, because we know that this may have, Mr. Roderick shared, we thought this one date, or, for me, I don't have particular dates in mind because we want to make sure we have a solid foundation. We're moving a good stuff, and we've had some transition. But I just want to share with you, and hopefully if I'm sharing some of this information with more, it'll answer your question as well. So we really, and Johanna and Cindy, thank you so very much. That was, well done, and I'm sure we'll have additional follow-up questions. We've got a wealth of information really being working, in the field in the district. But we do want to engage, some partners to inform this pilot study that we are proposing. We want to include the task force members and the process oversight team to talk about how this pilot study would be going forward. We've had some conversations with partners for technical assistance who really understand the Ohio improvement process now. I truly believe all number of school districts in Ohio, Cindy went over the different levels of the school districts who really know that Ohio improvement process. Perhaps not those independent districts, but as Mr. Moore said, we're talking about those districts that are really struggling. So we want to think about those ideas where we would, as I said, insert the assessment tool into some of our existing processes as we move forward, thinking about implementation. I think today's conversation has certainly sparked your interest, so we can think about where that entry point would be versus, as I said, and adding. Here's one more thing you're going to do extra. We don't want this template to look like it's going to be extra. So a few of the items on that forward, we want to evaluate, are those districts ready? Because some evaluate that readiness to be a part of a pilot. And very often pilots are not, we're selecting you and you're going to do it. Very often pilots are, let's share this information with the variety and invite them in to join in this thing they have to do it. We want to validate the tool. We've looked at this tool, it's been in-house since last May when the whole task force started. We want to really validate the tool against that knowledge base that's in the field. We might need to modify some areas. Someone talked about it, might have been Cindy or Johanna, a question afterwards, but it was right at the end of their presentation, about making sure individuals know what to do and how to do it. And that's what we're thinking about a facilitator's guide that will align the tools to the current required processes that many of our districts have to do, the one need, and the one plan, but to tell them, not just, hey, here's this template, this is the best thing ever, get busy doing it. It has to be a conversation beyond the superintendent certainly, but that superintendent would then have with their district personnel. Cindy showed you one of those slides, I think slide 30, where it talks about the regional teams there until it gets to the district and the building and the teacher teams that are right close interacting with the students. So that facilitator's guide, what do you do before? Because that template is just where they're going through assessment. What do you do before that so that everybody understands those 4 categories? And then the implementation, what are you going to do during? And then the follow-up. So this is just where they're assessing. You may remember, we haven't looked at it in a while, you may remember that they select priority areas. Now that template is very comprehensive. It's got 4 categories, lots of dimensions. And the district that is struggling, they might pick quite a few areas. And to do something well, can pick a number of areas. I always use my weight. I'm trying to cut my calories. I'm trying to exercise. I'm trying to walk. I'm trying to look at my carbs. I'm trying to do all of those. It's just too much. Give me another piece of cake. So we want to really make sure they understand it fully. And then maybe we have them select a category, perhaps, that they work on versus all 4. That's been one of the thoughts that have come up. That facilitator's guide would provide guidance on that use before, during, and after. Cindy and Johanna talked a little bit about some of these requirements that are there. We are making sure we want to monitor. I think that was one of the last things Johanna was responding to Mr. Roberts about, making sure that we can monitor the implementation, that it's done right. We want to have resources that folks can go to. If we have some resources that were discussed, we want to make sure we have resources that they could use, more than just a book. So the book study could be a year. And so more than a book, but where can they get those resources? And we think we have quite a few here at ODE. And then finalizing and evaluating the results. Now what? And that cycle of the Ohio improvement process is circular for a reason. Because you do that assessment, and I'm not going through all 5. You implement the plan, you review, you analyze, and evaluate, and you start over again. So that there might, this is nothing fast and true, but there might be a second wave of, pilot. Okay, so here's year 2. What did we learn from year 1 so that we can then tweak and modify to make it better as we go through that next cycle? Mr. Roberts, you have your hand up, so I'm going to go to you with the first question.
And thank you, Dr. Jones, and probably the 2 presenters can answer this, because for NAACP, the elephant is still in the room that I think I need to understand if it is still there or not. And that is when we started this task force way back when, the question, the expectation. And remember the expectation that for the change in 2018, where majority students' expectations were 86 point something. African American students' expectation was 63 point something. Is that expectation still in the conversation at the Department of Education, and specifically the Office of Accountability? You know what I'm talking about? Okay, and maybe you can help me, because that is, for us, meeting we have that comes up. And so I want to understand where that stands after all these months of deliberation and hearings.
Chris, are you on the small scale here earlier?
Yeah, I am. So I think, what the question is relating to the ESSA goals on gap closing. There are sort of two pieces to this. The accountability system, the goal is for all students to reach proficient, and that was a big part of the conversation in the last meeting on the report card. Separately, the gap closing component, the goals are targeted to significantly reducing gaps over, cutting gaps in half over 10 years. And so, again, I think we talked a little bit about this last time, but there are sort of two related pieces to that. There's the getting all, the goal of having all students proficient, and then the gap closing goals, which are focused on subgroups with the goals of cutting gaps in half in 10 years, with the eventual goal of eliminating all gaps.
Can I interpret that? The interpretation is that we still have the two standards, 86 points and 68 points. That is still the two expectations.
Again, there are two different things here, though, right? So there's an expectation, a proficiency expectation for all students to reach proficiency. The gap closing itself is specific to a baseline for different subgroups. And so for each subgroup, and it's based on the baseline of data with the goal of cutting it in half. So different subgroups will have different baselines. But it's all in the name of getting all students to proficient.
But Chris, if proficient is C, not D, why are we saying African American students can be an F? If proficient is C, why are the standards still lower? Expectations.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we can share some additional information on this, but again, going back to the report card presentation, last week, there are multiple measures on the report card, and the achievement measures, which are looking at proficiency in all levels of performance, are for all students with the expectation for all students. The gap closing is specific to, making substantial progress in closing gaps to meet that goal of proficiency. Different subgroups that, subgroups have different starting spots based on data, where those baselines.
Because it's given over a 10-year period.
That is correct.
Yeah, and I guess I'm gonna move on to see some other hand. That is still bothering and troublesome, and we're still gonna have an issue with that. Even though I kind of sort of hear what you're saying, but it's double speak, because if I hear you saying proficient is C, yet I put in place standards that say I can hit below C, and yet I can meet my essence obligation. That is trouble. But I'll move on and let others engage. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. Thanks, Chris. There's another question. Looks like it is Mr. McWilson.
Yes. I was actually going to hold my questions to next month. However, I just want to remind us, since 1954, we've had 13 5-year plans and 6 10-year plans. And as of the last 4 report cards from the state over the 3-year period, African American students went from 35 to 37 to 39. And President Roberts is correct. We had a meeting yesterday with Dr. Jones, Mr. Willard, in relationship to data. And I think President Roberts, going back, you have to have a detailed discussion on data, the way it's calculated, why it's calculated that way. Because if you look at when African Americans got into this position, it's in 1825. That's when public education based on property taxes was started this has been going on since 1831, when they got a chance to go to the first free school, and that was started by a Quaker family, and then Harvard. It's out in Harvestville. So I just wanted to put that on the table. I know we're going out of time, so I don't want to get into it, but I think everything that we look at, if we get the data-driven stuff clear and relevant to time, because none of the districts that have fallen in the DF category, if you look at the way performance index was calculated up to 2019, performance index for A was 10 points. For B was spread at points. For C, it was a spread of 10 points. And for D, it was a spread of 19 points. Which means that you can go in the right direction, be making progress for 19 straight years, and yet identify districts going in that direction at the time. So I think without the step here, at the end of the day, that needs to be root cause and regard. I just want to
And Mr. McWilson, I heard most of what you said. There's a little bit of feedback, but one of the things I really appreciate you and Ms. WilliAnn Moore being on the call with Dr. Willard and I yesterday. This start to the discussion. You followed up today in writing. I appreciate that. And we were able, I responded to HMC that we know we need to continue this discussion and maybe give you a document in hand so that it can be added to, or that you can use it in a variety of places. I wanted to bring your attention to just a statement in the chat that Tiffany shared about Dr. Goggins. That's why you come on. Glad you're here today. And he placed a link for a dear friend of mine, Dr. Candy Womack, who works with him in Kansas City Schools, the area superintendent now for Columbus, just looking at creating successful urban schools. And so, you know, we do have resources that are available on districts right here in Ohio, and that's something, you know, great. And I was talking to a board member lately, and they said, you know, if we know something that works, nothing wrong with feeling it. We're real good at that. So know that we are committed to this. I'm so thankful for Superintendent Bracken getting on at the start to say, I wrote it down that this work is important to him, and we're going to make sure we get our next meeting on his calendar so that hopefully he won't have a conflict and can be here along with President McGuire. So Superintendent, Chief Advisor Siddens, I'm going to turn it over to you to wrap up. Thank you all for your attendance here today. Great questions, and continue the conversation.
Yes, I'll just add my appreciation to Marva. Great discussion today. Cindy Dewey and Johanna Ward do some really excellent work with the department and the regional state support teams, and so I am really glad they're a partner with us in this work. So as Marva indicated, our plan is to arrange a follow-up meeting. We'll also convene a process oversight group as well to have a meeting on some of our next steps. And we especially want to talk about the pilot and nail down our timelines and activities. So I really appreciate your time today. I also want to give President McGuire a chance to address the group in closing as well.
I think
We've gone on mute, President McGuire.
am I unmuted?
You did it again. Sorry.
Am I unmuted now? I think everybody on this call, we talked about closing the gap. Well, with the transition between the former superintendent and the current superintendent, I think Interim Superintendent Siddens and Marva Jones have done an excellent job to close the gap. So let's give them a round hand of applause. We thank you for your leadership, and we look forward to the outcome. And Mr. Roberts, and Mr. McWilson, and my mother, Miss WilliAnn Moore. I believe we're gonna come up with a model for the nation. I keep saying that, but it's gonna take due diligence and take the best out of Ohio and tinker with it a little bit. And I think we can replicate it, not only in Ohio, but across the nation. Thank you all.
Let's do it.
Thank you all. We look forward to Carolyn Jones sending out process oversight meeting with Lake Task Force. So have a wonderful evening. Thank you again so much for your involvement. We need you to stay engaged. This is